Check out this exciting story that I will present to you today. In the worst Christmas storm, a millionaire breaks his car to save a mother and her baby, an encounter that changed his destiny. Carlos drove his luxury car slowly through the deserted streets of that rainy night. The raindrops slid down the windshield like tears, creating a melancholic scene that seemed to echo the emptiness he felt. His black sedan, impeccably polished, cut through the silence of the streets with the soft sound of its engine. It was a vehicle that symbolized success, but at that moment, for Carlos, it represented just another reflection of his loneliness. At 35 years old, Carlos Ferrer was what many would consider a successful man. He had built a business empire with dedication and sacrifice, reaching an enviable level for his age. He was admired by colleagues and feared by competitors. His life was a parade of important meetings, million-dollar negotiations, and personal achievements that, in the eyes of others, would be enough to fill any void. But for Carlos, they were just soulless trophies, victories that did not warm the heart. That night, something seemed different. Maybe it was the rain, maybe the silence of the empty streets, or even the invisible weight of his thoughts. Carlos gripped the steering wheel tightly, as if the contact with the leather could anchor him to reality. Why, even surrounded by everything he had ever wanted, did he feel so alone? As he slowly drove forward, Carlos watched the lights of the houses pass by in the corner of his eyes. Some windows twinkled with Christmas lights, trying to bring warmth to such a cold night. He thought of his own house, luxurious and perfectly decorated, but empty. No lights flickered there. No laughter echoed through the hallways. Only silence, always present, like an unwanted companion. Maybe I made a mistake somewhere, he muttered to himself, as a tired expression took over his face. It wasn't physical fatigue, but something deeper, a weariness that came from years of living for work, for money, without ever stopping to question the purpose of it all. Carlos stopped the car at a red light, and, for a moment, closed his eyes. The sound of the rain against the roof of the car seemed like a constant whisper, bringing back memories that he tried to ignore. Lost friends, relationships that never had the chance to blossom, youthful dreams that he abandoned in exchange for his career. Carlos opened his eyes and sighed. The traffic light turned green, but he didn't move right away. Something inside him felt stuck, as if he was on the verge of a change he couldn't yet understand. What am I doing with my life? He thought, as he finally accelerated. The rain was relentless. Each drop that hit Alice's face felt like an accusation, a constant reminder of how her life had become a whirlwind. She held Adrian tightly, protecting him from the cold under her soaked coat. The little boy lay against her, his blonde curls pressed against his wet forehead, still asleep, oblivious to the storm. Alice's steps were uncertain, unsteady. The wet streets reflected the yellowish lights of the streetlights, but the world around her seemed empty. It was just her son, and the incessant need to find shelter. When she finally reached her sister's house, she felt a glimmer of hope pierce the darkness that weighed down her chest. The light on the porch was like a beacon. That's all I need, Alice thought, just a warm place for one night. She climbed the stone steps to the door carefully, trying not to slip. Her hands shook, both from the cold and from the fear of what was to come. She hesitated for a moment before knocking. The sound echoed in the silence, muffled only by the sound of the rain. The door opened, revealing Alyssa. She was wearing a robe, her hair tied in a messy bun, and a confused expression on her face. Alice? What are you doing here at this hour, and in this rain? Alyssa's voice was a mix of surprise and concern. I needed help, Alice said, her words coming out brokenly. I had nowhere else to go. I just needed a place to stay. Just for today. Please. Alyssa looked at Alice, then at Adrian, who was fast asleep in his mother's arms. The boy looked so small, so helpless. But even so, something in Alyssa's expression hardened. She crossed her arms, a gesture Alice knew well. "Alice, you can't just show up like that," Alyssa said, shaking her head. I have my own life. I can't get involved in your problems every time things go wrong." Alice felt the ground give way beneath her feet. "Please, Alyssa, it's not forever. Just until I figure out what to do. It's for Adrian." Alyssa took a deep breath, looking away. "You know I love Adrian. But this isn't fair to me. It's the same every time. You make bad decisions and expect me to fix them." Alyssa's words were like knives. Alice felt tears begin to mix with the rain on her face. She knew her sister was right, but that didn't make her refusal any less painful. "Alyssa, I don't have anyone else. Please ... Alice's voice nearly broke. Alyssa looked back at Adrian, her face showing a brief moment of doubt. But in the end, she shook her head. "I can't, Alice. Not this time. You need to learn to fend for yourself." Alice stood there, frozen. Alyssa's words echoed in her mind like thunder. Finally, Alice took a step back, hugging Adrian close. "I understand," she murmured, trying to keep her voice steady, even though she was breaking inside. "I'm sorry to bother you." Alyssa watched Alice walk away, but she didn't call back. The door closed slowly, and Alice stood there for a moment, staring at the damp wood. The rain continued to fall, soaking her even more. Alice had nowhere to go, but she couldn't afford to stop. She tightened her grip on Adrian and began walking again, each step more difficult than the last. "It's going to be okay, my love," she whispered to her son, even though she didn't believe it herself. The rain couldn't hide her tears, but Alice kept going. Because for Adrian, giving up wasn't an option. Carlos was inside, the engine still running, but his mind was far away. He was 35 years old and had every reason to feel fulfilled. A successful job, a car that was the dream of many, and a bank account that reflected years of effort. But the emptiness inside him was deafening. He gripped the steering wheel tightly, his fingers contracting and relaxing in an automatic movement. His eyes stared at the street through the fogged-up windshield. Everything was blurry. The streetlights, the glare of passing car headlights, and the figure of a woman walking on the sidewalk in the storm. He noticed her hunched posture, the weight of what looked like a child in her arms. For a brief moment, something made him hesitate. Who walks like that in a rain like this? On the other side of Carlos's window, Alice was fighting the cold and despair. Her hair, soaked, stuck to her face, and her unsteady steps showed how exhausted she was. Adrian was whimpering softly against her chest. She tried to comfort him, but her own voice was shaking. She didn't know what to do or where to go. After Alyssa's refusal, the world seemed crueler than ever. "Calm down, my love. Just a little bit more," Alice whispered, feeling the lump in her throat. But she didn't know what a little bit more meant. The only certainty was that she had to keep going. Carlos rolled down the window just enough to smell the rain and the damp chill of the night. He didn't know why he was still standing there as the traffic sped by around him. It was as if the storm outside the car reflected the silent chaos inside. He sighed, his eyes still following the woman's figure. Something in the way Alice was holding the child caught his attention. The scene seemed charged with a pain he recognized, although he couldn't quite put his finger on it. Alice stood for a moment under the light of a street lamp, trying to adjust the coat around Adrian. Her arms ached from holding him for so long, but she didn't complain. She just wanted to find somewhere dry. Her eyes scanned the street, desperate, but everything seemed unreachable. It was at that moment that Carlos saw her face for the first time. Even from a distance, the expression of helplessness was evident. In the muffled silence of the car, Carlos felt a strange impulse. He pressed his lips together, pondering for a moment before muttering to himself, "Why does this bother me so much?" He wasn't the type to interfere in the lives of strangers, but something about that scene made him question his own indifference. As Alice resumed walking, Carlos turned on the windshield wipers as if that would clear his mind. But instead of moving on, he stood there, watching as the woman disappeared into the darkness. Alice was a picture of despair as he drowned in a comfortable void, protected by the soft leather of his seat. The storm wasn't just rain. It was the cruel reflection of two worlds that, although separated by circumstances, shared the same restlessness. Alice was fighting for survival, Carlos for a reason to exist, and, under that stormy sky, their paths were about to cross. Carlos was still standing in the car, the rhythmic sound of the windshield wipers filling the silence. The woman's face in the rain remained in his mind, an image he couldn't ignore. As Alice walked away, something in him began to stir, like a spark within a void that had long been cold and stagnant. He watched in the rear-view mirror as Alice tried to walk with the child in her arms. Her steps were uncertain, stumbling with exhaustion and desperation. She seemed to be losing her strength. Carlos took a deep breath and muttered to himself, "What am I doing? It's none of my business." But before he could finish the sentence, his hand was on the gear shift, and he put it in reverse. The car moved slowly along the soaked street. He didn't want to scare her. When it finally stopped beside her, he rolled down the window and called out, "Hey, are you okay? Do you need help?" Alice stopped in her tracks, clutching Adrian close. Her eyes were wide, her expression full of suspicion. It was hard to see the man inside the car because of the rain, but his voice sounded genuine. Still, she hesitated. "We're fine," Alice replied, her voice shaking. She took a step back, instinctively protecting her son. Carlos could hear the fear in her posture. "Look, I don't want to scare you. It's just, the rain is heavy, and you look exhausted. Is there somewhere you can go?" He tried to sound as gentle as possible, but he could feel the weight of the difference between them. Him, dry and comfortable in the car, and Alice, soaked and vulnerable on the sidewalk. Alice swallowed hard. She didn't want to trust a stranger, but she had no other options. Her arms ached, and Adrian was already starting to get cold. I need a place to shelter my son, just for today," she said, her voice thick with emotion. Carlos nodded, something in his expression softening. "Climb in. I'll take you somewhere safe. There's an all-night diner nearby. At least you can warm up and figure out what to do." Alice hesitated again, looking at Adrian, who was now whimpering from the cold. Finally, she took a deep breath and made her decision. "Okay," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Carlos got out of the car and quickly opened the back door for her. He grabbed a coat from the passenger seat and held it out to her. "Here, cover your son with this. It's not much, but it'll help." Alice climbed in carefully, adjusting Adrian in the seat while wrapping the offered coat around him. Carlos got back behind the wheel, turning the heater up to full blast. The silence inside the car was filled only with the sound of rain hitting the roof. "Thank you," Alice finally murmured, not looking directly at him. Carlos glanced at her in the rearview mirror. "No need to thank me. It's the least anyone could do." Alice laughed bitterly, almost inaudibly, and said, "Not everyone." Carlos didn't answer. He didn't know what to say. As he drove, he realized that this small act, stopping and helping, had changed something inside him. For the first time in a long time, he felt that his night had some meaning. And so, under the storm, two strangers met, each carrying their own inner storm. The car drove through the wet streets, the constant sound of the rain filling the spaces between the words that had not yet been said. Carlos adjusted the rearview mirror to see Adrian, now sleeping in Alice's lap, wrapped in the coat Carlos had offered. The child seemed small and fragile, but there was a weight to the scene that Carlos couldn't ignore. Alice stared out the window, her eyes fixed on the blurred lights of the city. She was grateful for the warmth of the car, but her mind was still buzzing with uncertainty. She knew that this man was a stranger, but for some reason, she felt safer there than in many other situations she had faced. "Is the little boy okay?" Carlos asked, breaking the silence. Alice looked at Adrian and nodded. "Yeah, just tired. It's been a long day." Carlos kept his eyes on the road, but he felt there was more behind that answer. "And you? It seems like you had a hard day too." Alice sighed, hesitating before answering. "More than one day, I'd say. But that doesn't matter now. The important thing is that my baby is okay." Carlos noticed the protective tone in her voice and decided not to press. Still, he couldn't contain his curiosity. How old is he?" 3. Alice stroked Adrian's hair, a small gesture of comfort. "He's my strength, you know. When I think I can't do it anymore, I look at him and remember that I need to keep going." Carlos felt a tightness in his chest. That sentence seemed so far from his own reality, but at the same time, so familiar. He cleared his throat before answering. "I can imagine. It must be hard for a mother to raise a child alone." Alice smiled weakly, still looking out the window. "Yeah, but we do what we can, don't we? And you? It seems like you were just driving around. Is everything okay?" Carlos let out a low, almost humorless laugh. "Driving around. I guess that's a good summation. It's been a while since I've known exactly what I'm doing with my life." Alice finally looked at him, puzzled. "It doesn't seem like it. I mean, you have a car like that. You seem successful." Carlos shrugged, his fingers drumming on the steering wheel. "The car, the career, it all seems important until you realize it's not. My wife left 2 years ago. Since then, I've had everything and nothing at the same time." Alice felt a weight in his words. She hadn't expected to find anything in common with this man, but she understood the emptiness of losing something or someone important. "I'm sorry. It must be hard." "Yeah," Carlos said simply, "but I'm trying to figure out how to change that. Maybe that's why I stopped today. To do something different, who knows?" Alice smiled, for the first time genuinely. "Well, Adrian and I appreciate that." The car stopped at a red light. Carlos turned slightly to her. "Do you have somewhere to go tomorrow? Any plans?" Alice looked away, her vulnerability evident. "Not yet. I just need some time. To think, to find something. It's not easy when you feel like the whole world is against you." Carlos pondered for a moment, his eyes fixed on the light. When the light turned green, he finally answered, "Maybe the world isn't so against you after all. Sometimes you just need a break, someone to listen." Alice felt a tear run down her cheek but quickly wiped it away. She didn't know why this man, a complete stranger, seemed to understand so much of what she was feeling. And there, as the rain continued to fall, something invisible began to form between them, a bond, small and fragile, but enough to make them both feel less alone. The journey continued smoothly, the sound of the car's engine mixed with the continuous sound of the rain that seemed to never stop. Carlos looked at the road, but his mind was elsewhere, occupied with thoughts about Alice and her story. Her words still echoed in his mind. "I just need some time. To think, to find something. It's not easy when you feel like the whole world is against you." Carlos didn't know exactly what he was feeling. A strange feeling, somewhere between sadness and empathy, took hold of him. As he drove, Alice's eyes, the words she hadn't said, the way she protected Adrian so tightly, all of this mixed together in his mind. Those words about being abandoned by his partner affected him more than he wanted to admit. Carlos, who, despite having a life of material success, knew what it was like to lose someone important. He felt the weight of the memory of his wife, who had left. But Alice's abandonment seemed to weigh even more heavily. She was alone, struggling to raise a child in a world that seemed to offer her no support. How can someone just abandon someone like that? Carlos thought. He had never been able to understand how easily some people left their responsibilities behind, especially when it came to a child. Adrian. The child's name kept hammering in his mind. The child, so small, so fragile. The look in Alice's eyes when she spoke about him, the way her voice softened and her posture straightened when she mentioned him, were clear signs that she was doing everything she could to protect him. Carlos felt the weight of the situation. He didn't know Alice well enough, but that feeling of helplessness, her fear of not being able to do enough, her desperation to give her son a better life, all of it affected him. He didn't know how, but something inside him told him that he couldn't just ignore it. What can I do to help? What else could anyone do? He thought, trying to find some way to act. Carlos knew he could only offer a temporary solution, but that seemed so small compared to all the struggle she was facing. Carlos looked at Alice, still staring at the window. Her face looked tired, but there was something else there, an invisible strength that he couldn't help but admire. Alice was there, facing everything, even when it seemed like the world was falling apart. Empathy for her grew inside Carlos, stronger with every kilometer they spent together. Maybe I can't solve everything, but... Carlos thought, an idea starting to form in his mind. He didn't know exactly what he would do with it, but he felt he had to act. Whatever it was, he didn't want Alice and Adrian to spend another night on the street or face more difficulties than necessary. And as much as Carlos tried not to think about it, there was a part of Carlos that couldn't ignore the emptiness he felt, a part that wondered if he could be useful to someone other than himself, other than his own pain. Carlos didn't know what the future held, but at that moment, he felt there was a way to help Alice. She was there, in front of him, with his son in her arms, and he couldn't just let them go and go on with his life, as if nothing had happened. Alice, Carlos began, his voice a little firmer, as if the idea was finally taking shape. He looked at her, waiting for her to look back at him. I want to help somehow. I don't know what you need, but if you need a place to stay or anything else, I can help you. I can help you. Alice looked at him, her eyes surprised, as if she hadn't expected those words. The silence in the car seemed to stretch, but when he saw her lips part, he knew she was processing his words, trying to decide what to do. Carlos felt the tension in the air, but he didn't regret it. There was something good about wanting to help someone, even if it meant stepping out of one's comfort zone. He didn't know exactly what he would do next, but that impulse of empathy had begun to take shape. And somehow, he knew that this moment, this decision, would be a turning point, both for him and for Alice. He had always considered himself a practical person, someone who solved problems objectively. But Alice's situation wasn't something he could easily solve with money or quick fixes. He needed to think of something more, something that was genuine. The proposal he had made to Alice, to help her, to give her a place to stay, still echoed in his mind. He knew the decision wasn't easy. Those words were weighing on his shoulders, and the discomfort of offering help to a stranger made him question his intentions. But at the same time, He felt like he couldn't walk away. That woman and her son were alone, helpless. It wasn't right to simply ignore them. Something inside him told him he needed to do more, not out of obligation, but because the encounter had changed something inside him, something he could barely understand. They approached the quieter part of town, and Carlos realized he was getting close to the old street where his apartment was. He hadn't lived there for months. With the rush of work and his routine, he barely used that place. The mansion where he lived seemed impersonal, an empty place where he barely felt at home. But the apartment, this was different. It was simpler, more welcoming. A place where he still had some memories, where the atmosphere was warmer and less cold, despite not being big. As he drove, the thought of hosting Alice in that apartment seemed like an option. It wasn't the mansion. He knew that taking Alice to his mansion, with its luxury and space, wouldn't make sense. That wasn't genuine help. It was a temporary solution. A solution far from her reality. But the apartment, that place still carried a bit of humanity, of something he felt was more appropriate. Of course, he still wondered if he was doing the right thing. Would it be strange? He barely knew Alice, but at the same time, there was a part of Carlos that was tired of his selfish life, of his empty and repetitive routine. He looked at Alice, who still had a distant look in her eyes, trying to calm Adrian, who had woken up briefly with the movement of the car. The child was hugging his coat, still sleepy and tired, but calm now. Alice looked exhausted, but with an undeniable strength, as if the whole world could fall apart. But she would always stand firm. Carlos couldn't ignore how much she was struggling. "Alice," he said, his voice a little hesitant but firmer now. She looked at him, and he felt the weight of the decision approaching. "I have a place. An apartment, actually. It's small, but you and Adrian can stay there for now. At least until you find something more stable." Alice looked at him for a moment, as if trying to understand the offer. It didn't seem like a big mansion, but something simpler, more affordable. Carlos felt a sense of relief when he realized that she didn't refuse outright. He knew Alice had her doubts, but perhaps she was as desperate as he was to do something right. "I don't know," Alice said, her voice hesitant but not entirely dismissive. "I don't want to bother you. I don't know what to expect from you." Carlos felt a pang of understanding. He knew it was strange for her, that she probably never thought a stranger would offer her home, even if it was just an apartment. He sighed and added, "I don't want you to think I'm doing this out of obligation. But if you and Adrian need a place to stay until everything gets sorted out, it's the least I can do." She looked at him, as if weighing his words, and finally said with a sigh, "Thank you, Carlos. I accept." The relief was immediate. The feeling of doing something good, something genuine, filled Carlos. He had strayed so far from caring about others, always living at his own pace, in his own routine. But now, he felt like his life had been touched in some way, and he couldn't just go back. "No need to thank me. Let's go." Carlos turned the key in the ignition and headed toward his apartment. He knew he didn't have all the answers. He didn't know what the future held for Alice and Adrian or how it would all fit into his life. But for now, he was doing the only thing he could, helping. And that, for a moment, made everything feel right. Carlos's apartment was simple but cozy. The walls, although not adorned with luxuries, exuded a sense of warmth and tranquility. The bed was small, but enough for Alice and Adrian to settle in for the night. The couch was comfortable. The whole place exuded a calm, unlike the fast-paced and cold life Carlos had in the mansion. He had shown her the apartment, left her the keys, and made sure to explain how to work his cell phone, which was on the table in the living room. "If you need anything at all, you can call me. The number is here. I'll be close by." He seemed nervous, although he tried to hide it, and Alice, in turn, seemed to have found some relief in that little refuge. At least for now, she and Adrian were safe. After leaving Alice and Adrian to settle in, Carlos went about his routine. But something was different. The weight of the decision to help them wouldn't leave him alone. He thought about those words she had said and the look she had given him when he had made the offer. He didn't know what he was doing, but he knew he couldn't go back on it. The rest of the evening passed slowly for him, and as he tried to concentrate on his work, thoughts of Alice and Adrian wouldn't leave him. The next day, while Carlos was in an important meeting, his cell phone rang. Alice was on the other end of the line, and the concern in her voice was immediate and cutting. "Carlos, it's Alice. I don't know what to do. Adrian, he's very sick." Her voice was desperate, almost muffled by anguish. The sound of Adrian crying in the background cut through the silence on the line, and that was enough to make Carlos's heart race. He took a deep breath, trying to control the growing sense of urgency that was building inside him. "Calm down, Alice," he said firmly, trying to calm her down. "What happened? What's wrong with him?" Alice was visibly shaking, the fear in her voice unmistakable. "I don't know. He started coughing a lot and now he has a fever. I tried to give him something, but he's so weak. Carlos, I don't know what to do." Carlos felt a chill. He had never been good at dealing with emergencies, but at that moment, he knew he couldn't hesitate. He tried to hide the tension in his voice, but he couldn't. "Alice, calm down, I'm coming. I'll pick you and Adrian up. We'll go to the hospital. Don't worry, everything will be fine." Alice's anguish was palpable, but upon hearing the firmness in Carlos's words, she gave a quiet but grateful response. "Thank you, Carlos. Thank you for being here." He hung up the phone quickly, his thoughts racing. What should he do? What was happening to Adrian? He didn't know. All he knew was that he needed to be there, by Alice's side and the boy's side. The situation seemed like a sudden nightmare, and he was being dragged into it, without even having the chance to understand what was happening. Within minutes, Carlos was in his car, speeding toward the apartment. The traffic seemed slower than ever, as if time had slowed down on purpose. He knew he couldn't waste any time. Whatever was happening to Adrian, he needed to be there for Alice. When he got to the apartment, Alice was waiting at the door, her face pale and her eyes red with worry. Adrian was in her arms, pale and with his eyes closed, coughing every now and then. He looked so small and vulnerable at that moment, more fragile than Carlos had imagined. "I don't know what happened, Carlos. He seemed fine yesterday. And now—" Alice looked at him with despair in her eyes. Carlos quickly approached. "We're going to take him to the hospital now. We're not going to wait any longer, okay? I'm here with you." He took Adrian in his arms carefully, feeling the heat of the boy's fever. "He's going to be fine, Alice. We're going to make sure of that. We're going to take care of him," he said, more to himself than to her, trying to find some kind of strength amidst the growing sense of helplessness that was forming inside him. Alice looked at him gratefully, but her eyes were still full of fear. "I don't know what I would do without you, Carlos. I don't know what to do without help." Carlos felt the weight of her words, and for the first time he didn't care that he was a stranger to her. He was there for her, for Adrian, and that was all that mattered. "You're not alone. I'm here, and I'll be by your side. Don't worry." As they hurried out to the car, Carlos felt a deep sense of connection, as if, in that moment, he had found something more important than anything life had offered him so far. He didn't know what would happen next, but in that moment, he was doing what mattered most. He was there, ready to help. And somehow, that made everything seem less difficult. After the incident with Adrian, Alice began to see Carlos in a completely different way. That night, as he accompanied her to the hospital and stayed by her side until the doctors confirmed that the boy was okay, something changed. She had always considered herself an independent person, someone who had learned to fend for herself, to trust only herself after so many hardships. But at that moment, seeing Carlos acting calmly and determinedly, caring for Adrian as if he were his own son, something inside her softened. Alice had never expected anyone to care enough to help her in such a genuine way. She had met many men throughout her life, but none of them had shown such a pure gesture of solidarity. At first, she thought Carlos was just doing it out of charity, or maybe even out of some kind of obligation. But the way he looked at her, the way he worried about Adrian, didn't seem like that at all. He was there because he cared. As the car drove back to the apartment, with Adrian finally asleep in Alice's arms, she looked at Carlos differently for the first time. He was tense, but not in a selfish way. His expression held no judgment, and it made her wonder about the man she thought she knew. "You were very good to Adrian," she said, her voice soft, full of gratitude, but also a hint of vulnerability. "I don't know what I would do if it weren't for you." Carlos glanced at her briefly before looking back at the road, trying to remain calm. "You don't have to thank me. I just did what anyone would do. He's just a kid. And you're his mother. I couldn't leave you in trouble." Alice nodded, but a part of her mind was still skeptical. She wasn't used to relying on others, especially someone she had just met. The resistance she had always had to trusting others was starting to crack, albeit slowly. When they got to the apartment, Carlos helped Alice carry Adrian to the couch, where he could rest a little longer. Alice watched him silently, watching him move with a naturalness that surprised her. He seemed so sure of himself, so calm, but he was also there without hesitation, doing whatever was necessary. "Are you always like this?" she asked, finally breaking the silence. "Always so calm in situations like these?" Carlos paused for a moment, looking at her. What could he say? He had always been a more reserved person, someone who didn't show his emotions easily. But the way Alice looked at him, the way she began to trust him, made him feel a need to be honest, more than he had ever imagined. I'm not perfect, Alice," he began, his voice softer. "But when you see someone going through something so difficult, I can't just ignore it. I, more than anyone, know what it's like to feel lost and unsupported. It's not easy, and sometimes we don't know how to deal with the weight of things. But I think we can at least try to be helpful to others when they need it most." Alice was silent, processing those words. It was something she hadn't expected to hear from Carlos, the man she had imagined to be distant and indifferent. Maybe he wasn't so different from her after all. She had always been strong on the outside, but he also seemed to have his own internal battles. Her trust in him began to grow, albeit slowly. She knew she couldn't let herself go completely right away, but something in her heart was beginning to open up, a little space for him. It was as if, for the first time in a long time, she could trust that there was someone willing to help her, without expecting anything in return. "Thank you, Carlos," she said, her voice now calmer. I don't know how to explain it, but you've been more than I ever imagined. I thought you'd just be a temporary help, you know. But now you're more than a stranger offering support. I trust you." Carlos smiled slightly, though he tried to hide the emotion that was rising inside him. He'd never been good at dealing with thanks, but hearing those words, coming from Alice, meant more than he could say. He knew she was still allowing herself to trust, and that, for him, was already a big step. I know you didn't expect this, Alice. But for me, it's natural to help when I can. And if you need anything, anything at all, you know you can count on me. I'm here, really." Alice looked at him, her expression softer now. The weight of her own defenses was starting to dissipate. She still didn't know where all this would lead her, but at least in that moment, she knew she wasn't alone. And, as hard as it was to admit, this was more than she could have ever hoped for. The bond between them was growing deeper, silently, but firmly. Alice was beginning to trust, and Carlos was beginning to understand that his life could indeed be different. Maybe, he thought, this meeting was just the beginning of something new, something more significant than he had imagined. After arriving home, Alice went to put Adrian to bed. The atmosphere in the living room of the apartment was calmer, but the silence between Alice and Carlos seemed charged with something more. Adrian was finally asleep, wrapped in a blanket on the couch, with a serene smile on his face, oblivious to the worries that had accumulated over the last few hours. Alice sat in the chair next to him, watching her son, but her mind was elsewhere. Conflicting thoughts ran through her head, and a growing feeling of distrust began to emerge, even after all the help Carlos had given her. She looked at him, who was standing near the window, watching the rain outside. He seemed distant, but the kindness in his demeanor never wavered. Carlos seemed to really care, but something inside Alice couldn't understand why. She had never met someone so willing to help, so ready to give up his own time and comfort for a stranger and her son. Doubt consumed her. What did Carlos want with this? Alice knew she needed to question this, not only for herself, but because deep down, she was afraid of being deceived again, afraid of trusting someone and ending up getting hurt again. She took a deep breath and, with a calm but firm voice, addressed him. "Carlos," she called him, making him turn to her, his gaze attentive. "I need to know. What is your real motivation? Why are you doing this for me? Why have you been so concerned about us? Don't get me wrong, you've been amazing, but I can't help but wonder, what do you want with this? What's behind all of this?" Carlos was silent for a few seconds, as if pondering her words. He knew Alice was just trying to understand his intentions, something any normal person would do. He felt a slight tension in his chest, but he wasn't offended. On the contrary, he admired Alice's sincerity. She wasn't someone who accepted help without question, and that, to him, was something he respected. "I understand your doubts, Alice," Carlos replied, his voice softer now, as if trying to find the right words. "I know it's hard to believe that someone would want to help without expecting anything in return. But honestly, I'm not doing this expecting some reward or favor in return. I'm here because, somehow, you and Adrian touched me. I saw it in your eyes. I saw what you've been going through, and I couldn't just walk away and pretend I didn't see anything. I don't want anything from you, Alice. I just want to help. I just want to be there when you need me." Alice watched him with silent intensity, trying to decipher his words and his gaze. She still felt a lump in her throat, as if she needed more. "But why, Carlos? You have everything you need, a mansion, a life of luxury, and I'm just a single mother with no clear future. It doesn't make sense." Her voice was shaking, but she couldn't hide her doubts. Carlos took a step toward her, closer now, but respecting her space. He knew Alice was vulnerable and felt the pain she carried. He had his own insecurities, but he was there, not because of something material or momentary compassion. It was something deeper. He didn't know how to express it, but he knew he had to try. "I don't know how to explain it properly either, Alice," he began, his eyes fixed on hers. "I've always had what I wanted, but, you know, for a while it all lost its meaning. I was empty, stuck in a routine where nothing really mattered. And then I found you. and I saw how much you've been fighting. And I felt that somehow it touched me. It's not about wanting more or expecting something in return. I'm not perfect, but I want to be there. I want to help because I feel like I can make a difference, because in a way, you and Adrian have something that I've lost. Alice was silent, Carlos's words weighing on her. She could see a sincerity in his eyes that she didn't find in many people. And, as much as she was resisting, something inside her began to loosen. It wasn't just practical help that he was offering. He was offering something that she had never known was so valuable. She closed her eyes for a moment, trying to organize her own feelings. When she opened them again, his gaze was softer, more understanding. I don't know if I can give you an immediate answer, Carlos. I'm afraid of getting hurt again. But for now, knowing that you're here and that you care, it helps me a lot. I just don't want to delude myself. Carlos looked at her carefully, recognizing her internal struggle. I understand, Alice. I'm not asking you to trust me right away. I know it takes time. But even if it takes a little longer, I'll be here, always. I won't leave you alone. Alice felt a wave of relief, a weight gradually lifting from her shoulders. She still didn't know where this would lead them. But at that moment, something in her began to change. She felt like she didn't have to carry the world on her shoulders alone. She could start to trust again, to believe that maybe there was something genuine in Carlos's help. He was there, without expectations, just to be a presence. And that was more than she could have imagined. The tension dissipated between the two of them, and even though the answers were still far from Alice's, something deeper united them. The need to support each other, to not be isolated in despair. They knew that the path ahead would not be easy, but perhaps together they could face it. The following days were a discovery for Alice. She didn't know what to expect from Carlos, but little by little she was surprised by the small gestures he made without any expectation of return. He didn't care about being noticed, but Alice was watching, and it was starting to break down the barriers she had built up over the years. One of these gestures happened on a rainy afternoon while Alice was on the couch, trying to organize her thoughts and plans for the future. She was tired, exhausted from the constant worries about Adrian's well-being and the struggle to survive on her own. At that moment, Carlos entered the room with a bag in his hands, smiling slightly. "Hi, Alice," he said simply, but with a kindness that seemed to ease the tension in the room. "I stopped by the store and saw something I thought Adrian would like." Alice looked up, suspicious at first, but when she saw that he was just smiling, she smiled slightly back, not knowing exactly how to react. "What is this?" Carlos took out of the bag a simple toy, but one that could mean the world to a 3-year-old boy. A colorful, remote-controlled car with big wheels. Adrian loved cars, and Alice knew that, but he had never had the opportunity to buy a toy like that. "I thought he might have fun with it," Carlos said, placing the toy on the coffee table in front of him. Alice, surprised, stood up and looked at the toy car. She couldn't understand why Carlos would care so much about something so simple, yet so meaningful. She knew how important toys were to Adrian, and seeing that Carlos thought about these little details made her start to look at him in a softer way. "Carlos, you didn't have to do this," Alice murmured, still in shock. "It's just a toy, but Adrian will love it." Carlos shrugged, not boasting. "It doesn't hurt, Alice. I want him to smile, even with everything you've been through. He's a child. He deserves to be happy." That night, Adrian played with the toy car for hours. He was delighted, laughing and running around the room, making the toy move everywhere. Alice felt a twinge of emotion in her chest when she saw the sparkle in her son's eyes, and a part of her, which had been closed before, began to open up. Time passed smoothly, like the waters of a calm river, But Alice was beginning to feel that she was somehow drowning in Carlos's kindness. He was always there, always willing to help, whether with Adrian, with daily tasks, or simply offering comforting company in quiet moments. But despite her gratitude, Alice couldn't help but feel overwhelmed. She knew she didn't need so much, shouldn't need it. It was hard for her to accept so much support, especially from someone she had barely shared her story with. Guilt mixed with gratitude, and it was beginning to weigh on her in unexpected ways. It was one Saturday afternoon, while Carlos was in the kitchen preparing a simple dinner, that Alice found herself in the midst of an internal turmoil. She was sitting at the table, watching Adrian play, but her mind was elsewhere. When Carlos appeared with the dishes and placed them carefully in front of her, Alice looked at him with a hesitant look. "Carlos," she began, her voice soft but full of a weight that she couldn't hide. I don't know how to say this, but I'm feeling overwhelmed by everything, by the help, by the things you've done. I didn't ask for this. I shouldn't be accepting everything like this, in such an intense way." Carlos, who was already beginning to understand the tension in Alice's eyes, stopped for a moment and sat down in the chair across from her. He watched her carefully, in no rush to answer, waiting for her to continue. Alice didn't know exactly what she was trying to say, but she felt like she needed to say it. That feeling of constantly being helped, even if with good intentions, was starting to become a silent pressure on her. "I know you just want to help," she continued, her words gaining more weight as she spoke. "But sometimes it feels like I'm being treated like I'm weak, like I can't do things on my own. And I know you're not doing this on purpose, but I don't know how to explain it, Carlos. I'm not good at accepting so much help. I've always been alone, and now, all this generosity, all this, it makes me scared." Carlos was silent for a moment, processing her words. He watched her, understanding more than she realized. He knew Alice had always been strong, but he also knew she was allowing herself to be vulnerable in a way she had never been before. He didn't want her to feel guilty for accepting his help. It was help he was offering wholeheartedly, expecting nothing in return, but he also understood that the feeling of depending on someone, even for a brief moment, could be overwhelming. "Alice," he spoke softly, his voice calm and full of understanding. "I'm not trying to make you feel weak. Quite the opposite. You're stronger than you think. And if you hadn't let me into your life, I would never have seen how incredible you are, as a mother, as a person. But I'm not here to burden you. I just want you to know that you're not alone. You don't have to carry the world on your shoulders alone. And I'm here for whatever you need, no demands." Carlos's words hit Alice like a gentle wave, pushing away some of the tension that was building in her chest. She looked at him, seeking some reassurance. "I know you're doing all of this willingly, Carlos, and I really appreciate it. But I'm not good at dealing with it. I feel like I'm asking too much, like I don't deserve all of this." Carlos smiled, but it wasn't a smile of disdain. It was a smile of understanding. He leaned forward slightly, his eyes fixed on hers. "You deserve it, Alice. You and Adrian deserve the best. And I'm here because I want to be, not because I feel obligated. Believe me, it's no burden to me. I'm happy to be here, to be able to be a part of your life, even if it's just a little bit." Alice took a deep breath, feeling his words seep into her mind. She still wasn't entirely comfortable with the idea of accepting so much help. But as difficult as it was, she knew that Carlos wasn't expecting anything in return. He wasn't trying to manipulate or impose his own conditions. He simply wanted to be there. Time continued to pass slowly, and with it, Alice and Adrian's days began to take shape in a different way. Carlos's constant presence in their lives brought a sense of security that Alice never imagined possible. But as much as she had grown accustomed to Carlos's kind gestures, She still carried a resistance in her heart, a fear of giving herself completely to something that seemed too good to be true. It was a calm Sunday afternoon. Alice was sitting on the couch, with Adrian next to her, playing with the remote-controlled car that Carlos had given her. She looked out the window, observing the tranquility of the day, but her mind was busy, reflecting on everything that had happened since Carlos came into her life. She still didn't know exactly how to deal with her own emotions. Carlos, who was preparing something in the kitchen, entered the living room and sat down next to her. His eyes were more serious, but there was a softness in them that Alice hadn't noticed before. He took a deep breath, as if he were pondering something important, before speaking, his voice filled with deep sincerity. "Alice," he began, turning to her with a serious but gentle look. "I need to tell you something. Something that I've been feeling for some time, and I can't keep it in any longer." Alice looked at him curiously, her breathing faster, as if she sensed that this moment would be decisive. She felt a wave of nervousness run through her body, but she tried to hide it. "What is it, Carlos?" He looked at her, his eyes fixed on hers, as if trying to find the right way to say it. I've fallen in love with you, Alice," he said, his voice soft but full of determination. "And it's not just a passing fancy. What I feel for you is real. And it's not just for you, but for Adrian too. I see a future with you, with our family." Alice froze. Carlos's words had hit her heart unexpectedly, like a bolt of lightning, stirring up a mix of emotions she could barely understand. She didn't know how to react. She didn't know if she could believe what he was saying, or if he was just saying it because he felt an obligation to help. She stared at him blankly, trying to process his words. "Carlos, I don't know what to say," she murmured, her voice breaking. "This is all so unexpected. I never imagined that someone like you, with everything you have, would be interested in me, in us." Carlos gave her a slight smile, but it wasn't an arrogant smile. It was a smile of someone who knew what she was feeling and wanted her to know it. "Alice, you have something that I've never found in anyone else. Strength, courage, and a huge heart. I saw that from the moment I met you on the street that rainy night. And since then, all I wanted was to help, but not just in any way. I wanted to be by your side, really. Not for charity, but because you and Adrian mean something to me." Alice felt a mix of emotions rise inside her. She wanted to believe him. She wanted everything he was saying to be real, but fear still kept her from giving in completely. She was afraid of another disappointment, another broken promise. She looked at little Adrian, who was now perched on the floor, playing with his toys, unaware of the gravity of the conversation between his mother and Carlos. I don't know if I can give in to this," Alice said, her voice full of uncertainty. "I don't know if I can ever completely trust anyone again. I've been let down before, and I don't want that to happen again, especially not by Adrian. He doesn't deserve any more pain, any more frustration." Carlos felt the weight of her words, and for a moment he was silent. He knew that Alice's past had shaped her into a tough and protective person. But he was willing to be patient, to wait as long as it took for her to truly trust him. "I understand your fears, Alice. And I respect that," Carlos said softly, moving closer to her, but not invading her space. "But I'm not here to force you into anything. I'm here because I want to be. And if you give me the chance, I want to build a life with you. Not just as someone who helps, but as someone who loves, who wants to take care of you and Adrian. I want to start a family with you. And I know that, in time, you'll see that I'm not leaving. I'm not that kind of person." Alice closed her eyes for a moment, processing everything he had said. Her heart was conflicted, between the fear of opening her heart again and the desire to believe in his sincerity. Carlos wasn't asking for anything more than a chance, an opportunity to show that his words were real. When she opened her eyes, she met Carlos's gaze, which was filled with a tenderness she didn't know could exist. He wasn't there for personal interest. He was there because he truly wanted to build something with her and Adrian. And, as hard as it was to accept, Alice knew that she was also starting to feel something for him, something she could no longer deny. "I don't know, Carlos," she said, her voice softer now, almost a whisper. "I don't know if I'm ready for this, but maybe I'm starting to believe that you really want to stay." Carlos smiled, his shoulders lightening. "I'm here, Alice, and I'll be, whenever you need me. Just let me show you that I can be the person you need. I'm not rushing, and I'm not going to rush anything either. I'll wait as long as it takes." Alice looked at him, for the first time truly looking to the future, to the possibility of a new life with Carlos and Adrian. She didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in a long time, she felt hopeful. Maybe, just maybe, she was willing to try. Life seemed to finally be heading in a new direction for Carlos. After weeks of living with Alice and Adrian, he felt like he had found something genuine, something that went beyond any superficial relationship. The connection he had with Alice grew stronger every day, and the way he engaged with Adrian, almost like a father, brought a warmth to his chest that he never imagined he would experience. It was real, it was sincere, and he was determined to make it work. But not everyone around him shared his optimism. As always happens when someone commits to something that goes beyond what is expected, pressure began to come from all sides, especially from his own family. Carlos had been raised in an environment where the image of perfection and status was more important than anything else. And Alice, a single mother with a young son and a difficult past, was not exactly the woman his family had envisioned for him. It was a cold Thursday afternoon when Carlos was first confronted with his family's criticism. He was having lunch with his parents at their mansion, and, as usual, the atmosphere was filled with formalities and false smiles. His mother, an impeccable woman who was always concerned with the family's appearance, wasted no time in bringing up the subject. "Carlos," she said, in a soft voice, but with a sharp look in her eyes, as if she were preparing to launch into a harsh comment. "I heard that you've been getting involved with that woman Alice and her son Adrian. Is that true?" He felt a wave of discomfort run up his spine. He knew this question was just the tip of the iceberg. He had expected it. But even so, he was unprepared for the impact of the words that would come next. "I don't understand, son," his mother continued, her tone now one of forced concern. "You, with everything you have, getting involved with such a difficult woman. She has a son, Carlos, and she has a history. You can't be serious about this. She's not the kind of woman you should be associating with. There are so many other better options for you." The silence at the table was heavy. His father, who had always kept his distance from most personal matters, looked calculating, as if he were weighing the impact of the conversation. Carlos took a deep breath, but his decision was made. He wasn't going to let it shake him. This conversation was happening, but he wouldn't regret what he felt for Alice. "She's an incredible woman, Mom," Carlos said, his voice firm, trying to remain calm. "And Adrian is a wonderful boy. They're going through a tough time, and I want to be there to help. I don't see anything wrong with that. I want to be with them, of my own free will." His mother shook her head, Alice not understanding. "You can do whatever you want, Carlos, but that doesn't change the reality. You're not just getting involved with Alice. You're taking on a responsibility that isn't yours. It's not fair to you, and honestly, I don't think she has the qualities you need in a partner." Frustration began to build inside Carlos, but he knew there was no point in arguing any further. His parents were stuck in their own expectations, and he wasn't going to change their mindset that easily. What bothered him wasn't just their criticism, but the way they disregarded Alice and Adrian without even trying to get to know them. For them, status and image were more important than their son's genuine happiness. At that moment, he stood up from the table. "I understand your concern, but I'm an adult, and this is my decision. I respect what you think, but I'm not going to give up on Alice and Adrian. They are my family now." With those words, Carlos quickly left the room, not waiting for any more arguments. He didn't want to hear any more, didn't want to hear that he was doing something wrong. He felt deep in his heart that he was doing the right thing. The evening was about to become a milestone in Carlos's life. He knew that this meeting would not be easy, but he was determined to turn the dinner into a demonstration to Alice of his commitment to Alice and Adrian. These moments of decision and reflection were not just about food and conversation. It was about showing his family, once and for all, how much he was willing to do to integrate Alice and Adrian into his life. Carlos's mansion, with its spacious rooms and imposing decoration, was the setting for the event. The house was immaculate, with soft lights illuminating the room in an elegant manner. The dining table was carefully prepared, with fine china, sparkling crystal, and gourmet dishes, all planned to impress, but also to be a reflection of who Carlos was now. He knew this dinner would be more than just a meal. It would be a chance to show his heart, and more importantly, to show Alice and Adrian that he was willing to fight for them, regardless of his family's opinions. Alice, beside him, was visibly nervous. She had received the dinner invitation with a mixture of gratitude and apprehension. Things had not been easy, and being in this luxurious setting, surrounded by Carlos's family, felt like a big step for her. She feared judgment, feared being seen as someone who didn't belong in this world, someone who wasn't enough for him. But as she looked at Carlos, she felt a small spark of hope. He was with her, and that meant more than she could ever put into words. "Adrian is excited about the food," Alice said, trying to break the tension as she rocked the little one in her arms. "But I don't know if I'm ready for this dinner. It seems so too perfect." Carlos smiled softly, placing his hand on Alice's shoulder in a comforting gesture. "I know it's a big step, but remember one thing. You're not here to please anyone. You're here because I want you to be. And so does Adrian. We're a family, Alice. It doesn't matter what anyone else thinks." She nodded, feeling her heart beat faster, Carlos's trust being a firm foundation for her to lean on. When Carlos's family arrived, the atmosphere became more tense, but he did not back down. Her mother, as always, looked flawless, with a perfect smile, but her eyes watched Alice with a mixture of curiosity and judgment. Carlos's father, serious and distant, exchanged quick glances with his wife, making it clear that they were not completely comfortable with the situation. Carlos's sister, Anna, seemed more relaxed, but was also cautious, observing the interactions with a more analytical eye. The dinner began formally, with the first toasts and traditional greetings, but soon the weight of expectations was felt. The conversation flowed, but Alice could see the subtle criticism in her in-law's eyes. She felt like a fish out of water, but tried to remain calm. I tried to understand how Carlos could be so calm, so sure of his choices. It was then that Carlos, feeling the pressure of the moment, decided it was time to speak. He stood up, asking for everyone's attention, and there was silence at the table. "I know for some of you this situation is a little unexpected. I also know that it's not easy to see things in a different way, but I want you to know one thing. Alice and Adrian are not just part of my life, they are my life now. I'm here today because I want my family to know them as they really are. It's not a question of status. It's not a question of appearance. It's a matter of the heart." Alice's eyes filled with emotion. She never imagined she would hear those words from Carlos, especially in such a formal and expectation-filled environment. He was there, in front of his family, speaking with an open heart about his truth, about Alessandro. I know it's not easy, and I don't expect everyone to accept it right away. But I want you to see who Alice is, and who Adrian is. They are not an obstacle in my life. They are what I want most now. I want our family to grow, and that starts with acceptance from all of you. Those words were like a blow of sincerity, breaking the defenses of everyone around. Carlos's mother, who previously seemed immune to any type of emotion, looked at Alice more closely, perhaps beginning to see something in her that she hadn't noticed before. Carlos's father, who had remained silent, now seemed more thoughtful, as if his words had had a greater impact than he expected. Anna, Carlos's sister, was the first to speak after his déalisation. "Carlos," she said with a sincere smile, "if this is what you want, then I support you. It doesn't matter what others think. I just want you to be happy." Carlos's response was a simple look of gratitude. He knew that this acceptance would not be immediate, but he also knew that, at that moment, he was creating a new foundation for his life. Dinner followed now with a lighter atmosphere, and Alice began to realize that perhaps things weren't as impossible as she imagined. She realized that alongside Carlos, she was beginning to find a place for herself. A place where she could be accepted and loved, without the masks that society had always imposed on her. At the end of the night, while everyone said goodbye, Carlos stayed next to Alice, observing the calmness of Adrian, who was already sleeping in his mother's arms. He knew there was still a lot to do, but he felt that dinner was an important step. He was willing to fight for what he believed in. No matter what his family thought, he and Alice were creating a new definition of family, and that was all he wanted most. Carlos's mansion, which once symbolized the weight of expectations and status, was now just a backdrop for genuine love and the promise of a future that he and Alice would build together. In the days following dinner at the mansion, Carlos couldn't stop thinking about Alice and Adrian's future. Living with them had changed his life in ways he never imagined. Adrian, with his naive smile and infectious energy, had become an essential part of her world. Alice, with her silent strength and unconditional love for her son, awakened feelings in him that he didn't know still existed. He loved her, and more than that, he felt that Adrian was already his son, with or without a document that legally registered him. He looked at Alice, and with a soft smile said, "I was thinking, Adrian is as mine as you are, Alice. And I think the time has come to do it officially. I want to adopt him." Alice looked at him, surprised, but at the same time her heart seemed to race. She knew Carlos loved Adrian, but hearing those words so Alice-like and definitive made her feel a mix of relief and gratitude. Do you want to adopt him?" Alice asked, trying to process the magnitude of the proposal. She knew it meant something very big. It wasn't just a gesture of affection or support. It was a legal commitment, a lifelong bond. "But this changes everything, Carlos. This will change our lives forever." Carlos got up from the couch and approached Alice, taking her hand gently. "I know it changes, but I don't see it as something negative. On the contrary, it will make us even stronger. Adrian is a part of me now, Alice. I want to be his father. I want to give him all the opportunities he deserves, and I want him to grow up knowing that he will always have a home where he will be loved, no matter what happens." After a few days of preparation and gathering documents, the big day finally arrived. Alice and Carlos were in the courtroom, with Adrian in their arms, waiting for the adoption to be officially formalized. The room was quiet, with a solemn atmosphere, but Alice felt her heart beating fast, as if each beat was a reminder that her life was about to change forever. Carlos was at her side with a serious expression, but his hand was squeezing Alice's tightly, as if it were his way of reassuring her. He was so sure of his decision, so calm about what was about to happen. For him, Adrian was already his son, and the formalization was just a reflection of that. The judge, an experienced woman with a kind gaze, looked at them over her glasses, reading the documents in front of her. We are here today to formalize Adrian's adoption. After reviewing all the documents, I can say that the process is complete. Now, yes, Carlos said, smiling at Alice. We are a real family. Alice smiled back, hugging Adrian tighter. Yes, we are. And we will never be apart again. Adrian's adoption was not just a legal act. It was the consolidation of a deep and sincere love. It was proof that despite the challenges, uncertainties, and difficulties they had faced, they had found something unbreakable. The certainty that together, as a family, they could face any obstacle. Over time, Alice and Carlos continued to strengthen their union, becoming more connected every day, more and more certain that they had made the right choice. Life had become sweeter, but also more challenging. The routine of caring for Adrian, now officially adopted by Carlos, and maintaining a balance between their professional and family responsibilities, was something that required effort, but the love between them grew with each step. There was a peace in their home now, something Alice had never imagined she would experience again. She and Carlos were so in tune. Their conversations flowed effortlessly. The silences were comfortable, and their looks, full of complicity, said more than 1,000 words. They became partners not only in raising Adrian, but also in building a new life, a new beginning. One sunny afternoon, Alice felt something different. It was a light sensation, but at the same time intense. She had felt it before, but this time it seemed stronger. Something was changing in her body. She took the pregnancy test, and when the 2 lines appeared on the screen, she couldn't contain her surprise and excitement. She was pregnant again. It was a mixture of joy and a little fear. She knew that this news would bring changes, but now, with Carlos by her side, she had no doubt that everything would work out. When she told Carlos, she found him in his office, reviewing some documents, his head full of thoughts. Alice entered the room, still with a shy smile, and said, "Carlos, I have something to tell you." Carlos looked up, noticing the mysterious expression on Alice's face. "What happened, Alice? Is everything okay?" I'm pregnant," Alice said, her voice a little shaky but filled with an immense joy that she could not hide. Carlos was silent for a moment, absorbing the news. His eyes filled with emotion, and without saying a word, he stood up and ran to Alice, picking her up in his arms with a radiant smile. That's incredible, Alice. I can't believe it. Is it going to be a girl? A boy?" He could not hide his happiness, and Alice, laughing, replied, "I don't know. It's still too early to know, but I hope it's healthy. I just know that our family will grow, Carlos." The following days were filled with preparation and expectation. The couple went to the doctor, underwent tests, and at each appointment, Alice's heart filled with hope. They talked about the future, about what it would be like to have another child, about what Adrian thought of the idea. Adrian was excited about the idea of having a brother or sister, and Carlos, in turn, was excited about the opportunity to expand his family even further, consolidating the life he so desired with Alice. Months later, on a spring afternoon, Alice went into labor. Carlos was by her side, holding her hand tightly, feeling the weight of emotion as he watched Alice, with all her strength and courage, give birth to their daughter, Sophia. The room was quiet. The sound of the monitors was the only thing that could be heard, but for Carlos, the whole world seemed to have stopped. He was there, by Alice's side, sharing that very intimate, very important moment. When the doctor announced that Sophia had arrived into the world, Carlos could not hold back his tears. He looked at Alice, who was exhausted but with a radiant smile, and then his eyes fixed on little Sophia, who was now in Alice's arms, crying softly. "She's perfect," Carlos murmured, his voice breaking. "Yes," Alice replied, her voice soft. "She's ours. She's our overcoming, our love." In the days that followed, the couple adapted to the new routine with Sophia while continuing to care for Adrian with the same love and dedication. Life was no longer the same. Now they were a complete family, with their ups and downs, but with an unbreakable strength. Sophia's arrival not only solidified Carlos and Alice's union, but also sealed the journey of overcoming that they had both experienced. They had gone through so many difficulties, they had faced adversities together, and now, with 2 children, they felt closer than ever. They knew that no matter what challenges might arise, their love, the love that had been the foundation of their entire transformation, would always sustain them. When they looked at Adrian and Sophia, they saw more than children. They saw the fulfillment of their dreams, the fulfillment of a love that at first seemed unlikely, but that was now the strength that united them. Their journey was just beginning, and Alice and Carlos knew that with each other's support, there was no limit to what they could achieve together. We have reached the end of another story that I am sure touched you. I hope you enjoyed it. So to show it to us, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and activate the notification bell. By doing so, you will be kept up to date with our next videos. Now you will see 2 more incredible stories. I suggest you choose one of them and watch it. See you there.